Hi, I'm Barb Nangle. I'm the founder of Higher Power Coaching and Consulting. I want to welcome you to my podcast, Fragmented to Whole: Life Lessons from 12-Step Recovery. On this podcast, I share my experience, strength, and hope from recovery. I don't support or endorse any particular 12-step recovery fellowship, and I don't claim to speak for any of them either. My hope is that you will find my words helpful in some way, whether you're in recovery or not. This is episode 130 with guest Robin from Workit Health. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm here today with Robin from Workit Health, and she is my guest today. And I want to tell you a little tiny bit of a story of how she came to be my guest. So in addition to having my own business and working in a co-working space, I also work as the community engagement manager on a project at Yale University called Innovation to Impact. And it is funded by NIDA, the National Institute on Drug Abuse. And it is to teach substance use researchers entrepreneurial principles to help them to get their ventures to market much more quickly. And a couple of years ago, Robin came to Yale to do a presentation to the fellows that were part of the program. And part of what she said in talking about her venture was that she was in recovery herself. And so I came out to her afterwards by saying, hey, I'm a friend of Bill too. And then we just today launched the 2021 short course for this program. And so Robin is going to be one of the presenters again this year. So I guess she was in my subconscious. And a few weeks ago, I was meditating and it came to me, invite Robin from Workit Health to be on the podcast. So I was like, what the hell? I'll reach out to her. And she said yes. And so here she is. So I'm going to ask her to share her experience, strength, and hope of recovery first. And then we'll chat a little bit. And then I want her to briefly tell us about how it came to be that she developed Workit Health and what it is. So with that being said, take it away, Robin.
Thank you so much, Barb. It's so nice to be chatting with you today. And it was funny, back when I presented at Yale, I was, I think I was like 4 months pregnant at the time with my first daughter. And now I'm 4 months pregnant again with my second daughter. So I just feel always pregnant. But, and this will be our last child, hopefully. But yeah, so I remember that as being a wonderful day. And, you know, you weren't the only one. I think that's the magic of recovery, right? You weren't the only one that came up to me after and said, hey, I'm a friend of Bill, or I'm in recovery, or, you know, I'm practicing harm reduction. I got so many emails from people all over the States, you know, saying the same thing. So it was really heartwarming. And when they asked me to do it again, I jumped at the chance because I love the group and I like the mission. So yeah, I haven't shared my experience, strength, and hope in a while. I haven't led a meeting in a while or anything. So it might be a little rusty. And sometimes I get a little concise. Like I have, you know, it's shorter. So yeah. Barb, feel free to jump in.
I'm sure I will. Yeah.
Clarification points. But to start, a little bit about my background and my childhood. But I come from a family of 3 girls and grew up part of the time in Florida, part of the time in Canada, and came from a really creative background. So my mother's an artist. Her mother was an artist. You know, we had a lot of painting activities. We all had our own art studios, our own art sheds. My grandmother used to paint in a glass house that my grandfather built her in the woods. I know.
Wow.
I know. On that side of the family, I don't know if it's an Irish, Scandinavian thing, but that side of the family is super creative, which was really helpful for me because I'm a really creative person. I'm a creative kid. I like to live in kind of alternative universes, which is a problem when you meet alcohol, right? Like it's a problem later. There's a reason they call it spirits. But so that's that side. And my dad is very entrepreneurial, and he comes from a long line of entrepreneurs. So you could say I'm a direct result, kind of boring, of those two sides, right? Like artistic, I have an art degree and a business degree. Like I'm both. But it was great. So I had this great dreamy childhood, spent most of the time barefoot in the woods. You know, it was fantastic. But then a few things happened. So, but I do like to preface that, right? Because sometimes people come from trauma, a lot of trauma, and it feeds into what happens later. But for me, the trauma happened at very distinct points. So, you know, grew up playing with my 2 sisters. And then when I was in 6th grade, my favorite grandfather, Papa, I used to see him all the time in Florida. He was the only relative in the United States, and he lived close to us. So I used to see him and my grandmother, my step-grandmother, and my uncle, who was Papa's kid. He was 8 years old, Jeffrey. And one day I came home from school, and my mom said, sit down on the couch, I have something to tell you. And I said, what is it? What is it? I want to go talk on the phone. I'm dating myself. I want to go call my friends on my landline. And she said, your grandfather died. And so did Marcia, your step-grandmother, and so did Jeffrey.
Oh my goodness.
And I said, I didn't speak for a minute. My sisters were like white in the face. And I said, what happened? What happened? And she said, they were all sick. And I said, with the plague? And I just was like, with what? And she said, they drank too much. And that was the first time. So what had happened was Papa and Marcia were both alcoholic and kind of took each other down together, and they committed like a 3-way suicide.
Oh my goodness.
It was a crazy thing, right? So,
oh goodness.
And then to add to that, like really vindictive, they wrote all these crazy letters, and he was an entrepreneur in Toronto and then moved to Florida. So they wrote the Palm Beach Post and Miami Herald and the Toronto Star, all these crazy suicide notes that they had been published. So the press were like all around our house.
Oh my goodness.
This crazy thing. And that was my first introduction to like alcoholism, right? That was my first introduction to alcohol and the concept of drinking and the concept of, just drinking. And I remember just thinking, I will never do that. That is the silliest, most selfish, ridiculous thing. And it really, it really dimmed the light in my dad and my mom, but especially my dad. It was his father. And it was really hard for the family. And I don't think we ever recovered our buoyancy after that. So that happened. Then a few other traumatic things happened in 7th grade. And it was like a switch, right? Like, I don't know what it is. I think I absolutely have that physical side of myself. Still, when I walk through the liquor aisle in a grocery store, my mouth waters. I have a really physical reaction to alcohol. And I've always not been a very good eater. I eat like a bird a little bit, and then I eat too much, and then I eat too little. I've always been those two things. Those are my two things. And it was just like something flipped where it activated the allergy, I guess is a way to think about it. But so suddenly I went from being a normal teenage preteen, right, to like being severely anorexic. And then that shifted into severe bulimia. And then by 9th and 10th grade, I started drinking quite a bit to sort of solve the eating disorder. And then I was off to the races. So, it's just like a curtain came down on my childhood. It just was so stark, right? I went from being this kid in the woods and footloose and fancy free to being like a drinking, starving, binging and purging teen that was having sex and that was going to senior parties. And it was really hard. It was really hard on the whole family. So, and it's still strange to look back on. As a mother of 2 daughters, it really terrifies me that it's going to happen to me, but hopefully I was a little more equipped. At the time, I remember my dad saying to me, I don't even know what the word bulimia means. I have no idea what that means. I'm going to have to get a dictionary. Nobody had any idea how to cope with it. There was no language and vocabulary, and there was no space really in the family to say, this is what I'm struggling with. So as, an Al-Anon family tends to do, we thought the best solution was for me to go to boarding school. So I went to boarding school in Spain, and it was awesome. It was super fun for about 3 weeks, and then I just crashed and burned. So I just got into a lot of trouble, as teenagers, just with their parents, no parents around, no supervision. I was just a wild child. And it really became apparent to my teachers, like there were some adults around, my teachers and my host family, that I had a raging eating disorder. So what happened, and then I forged my dad's signature because I wanted to go to Pamplona, all this drama, right? And so it's never like, I think that's the confusion sometimes about alcoholics and people who suffer from addictive tendencies, is that it's clear, like, oh, this is an addictive tendency, equal sign, treatment, like we actually have a lot of bad behavior resultant quite often. So I had a lot of bad behavior. So I got expelled from school, and it was terrible because it was my senior year, and I had to write all my colleges and say, I was expelled from school, so I was humiliated for that and whatever. Now it seems like a small thing. But I went to my first treatment center. And that treatment center was called the Renfrew Center, and it was in South Florida. And they've since made a documentary more about kind of the era I was there, called Thin on HBO. And like, Barb, I don't know if you've ever seen it, but it was wild. It was like the early days of eating disorder treatment. And, you know, they usually say this in correspondence to alcohol and drugs, but they really treated you as if you were an inmate. You know, someone would follow you to the bathroom. You get locked in your room at night. You would have like bunks, you know, 4 to a room. You had a lot of exposure therapy in group settings. So a lot of screaming and kicking and crying and tantrums and really strange situations. So by the time I got out of there, like, message received, like, get your SHIT together and hide it better. That was the message. Sorry, Barb, you're muted.
Robin, what I was saying is I say the F word on this podcast all the time, so you don't have to spell out SHIT. You can say shit.
Okay, thank you so much, Barb. I tend to have kind of a potty mouth, so
yeah, me too. Obviously,
yeah. So that's what I learned.
Yeah,
jumping back into that, but that's what I learned. I was like, well, that was nuts. You know, like that was a terrible experience in my life. Wish I didn't have to do that. I really should have been more careful, and I should learn to control this better. And so I sort of resigned myself and said, I mean, I had tried to stop so many times, right?
Of course.
I had tried to do everything under the sun and say, tomorrow is my day, mark a calendar, put it on the wall. I'm not going to throw up tomorrow, or, you know, tomorrow's my day, I'm not going to drink. It was more at that time as a 16-year-old, more eating disorder stuff. But I basically, after that experience, said, okay, I'm going to have to do some research. I'm kind of a methodical, pragmatic person too. So I did research. I like literally went online and did research. How do I hide my eating disorder? So
not how do I get rid of it, but how do I hide it?
Hide it? Yeah,
that's very addict thinking. I love
very
it.
Addict thinking.
Yes,
exactly.
yes,
And I basically was like, this is something I am going to carry for the rest of my life. There is no cure. I've tried it all. I mean, as a 16-year-old, having tried it all, like, hilarious. I was like, I am the veritable expert, but I just said I need to hide it better. So that summer I worked on hiding it better. And it was kind of nuts, though. What happened was I left Renfrew. I went home for like a day, and then I went up to Michigan, University of Michigan, to go to school. I mean, it just was a different time. I mean, not that it was back in I guess that would have been in the early 2000s, but there was no grace period. There was no thinking of step down programs or halfway houses or, you know, transitional living or whatever. It was just, okay,
you're done.
Yeah, you're done. You're cured. So I went to Michigan, and I went to University of Michigan, which was the only school I did not tell I was expelled. So also, I was so paranoid for the 4 years I was there that they were going to kick me out and find out.
Right.
It was so funny. But so I went there under weird circumstances, but I went, and the eating disorder kept going, but I did get better at it, but I got better at hiding it. And it's easier if you're not living in a very small, you know, Spanish apartment with 5 people. So
right.
It was terrible, though. I would just wake up in the morning. I would binge and purge, go to class, binge and purge, go to class. So what happened was one time, this was like in my freshman year, probably a couple months in, I was hanging out with a friend of mine, and he said, let's go. There was this terrible liquor store called Sake Bombs. Let's go to Sake Bombs. We can buy wine there without an ID. And I said, okay, you know, let's do it. And so we went, we got wine, we drank, and we were having fun, whatever. He went back to his room, and I drank the rest of the box. We got boxed wine. And I just thought, this is the single greatest gift to man. And I remember thinking, I totally get why Papa drank as much as he did, right? To me, it was an ethereal, like, euphoric experience.
Yeah.
It really was. It was. I mean, for like 2 seconds, but it was. It was this great escape from what I called the itchy reality of the day-to-day. You know, in a way that was so much more effective than an eating disorder. Eating disorder got me to like 3. This got me to 10. I mean, it really solved it for me. And then when I added other things later, like prescription pills, like it really solved it. It got me to 11. But it just was the solve. It was the solve for all of that pain I was holding and all of the physical discomfort I was holding, and it was the solve. So I just thought, this is awesome. So every single night I drank. Like, it was just from then on, daily drinker, right? And then by the time, so that summer, the pattern continues. I went to live in London for the summer. Just, it got worse and worse, you know, to the point where people were starting to really notice. And then the following year, my sophomore year, I lived alone, and I don't know, there's not so much to say because it's, you get nothing done. But I was a solo drinker. I mean, I would go to parties, but I wouldn't remember. I would black out. So I started to drink like earlier and earlier in the day. And then by the time it was the following year, my junior year, I was drinking all day, every day, to the point where all of my friends were noticing. They were like, you have wine teeth right now, and it's like your econ exam, you know, and just things like that. So in that, I was probably 19 at the time. So my drinking career and my eating disorder career lasted from, I would say, like 12 to 22. So it's condensed into that decade of pain, of hell. But it was really hard. It was hard to maintain. And then ultimately what ended up happening was, you know, I ended up actually being in such dire straits that I called my parents and I called my dad and I said, I want to go to rehab. Like, I can't do this anymore, because I couldn't get to class. And I just got on a temporary suspension, and I had to get zeros in all of my courses or Fs, you know, and so I was just really non-functioning. So I went to my next rehab center, and this time I went for alcoholism. So I got there, and they quickly said, you have a history of eating disorders. We're going to switch tracks. We're going to switch you to the eating disorder track. And so all of this, Barb, you know about Workit Health, so it's a bit of a preloaded story, like a foregone conclusion. But all of these experiences, my family navigation, getting in the care gaps, you know, one-on-one talk therapy relating to psychiatry, relating to treatment settings, the tracking into an individualized track, all of these things went into Workit. All of these are reasons I stopped doing design full-time and switched to healthcare. So I was put in the eating disorder track, which was really hard because I was not ready to look at my eating disorder. And I did not help. I mean, I didn't even talk about drinking. So literally, not even on the plane on the way home, I literally got the rehab driver on the way to the airport to stop at a Publix because I had to use the restroom, ran in, bought alcohol, ran out, and started drinking.
Wow.
Yeah. This is like $45,000 later. My parents were livid. You know, they were like, that's the last time we're sending you to that fancy place. You know, they were livid. And so, but I was off to the races again. So I was just blacking out all the time. I flew home. You know, I flew back to Michigan. I tried to go back to class, lasted one day, left class halfway through and started, you know, just drinking all the time. And so, it kind of came to a head, and I went to a detox center in Michigan. I tried that, you know, started drinking afterwards. I went to another rehab in Michigan. It was really faith-based. So, you know, it just was like, this is not working for me. I come from a secular background, like Jewish, if anything, but, and so what happened for me was I called my friend who I had known from the rehab I went to and said, where are you? What are you doing? And she was in California. And so she was at this transitional living place on the beach in California. And I'm in Michigan in November. And it's freezing and dark. And I just said, oh my gosh, I want to go there. That sounds great. And everyone was angry at me. You know, the school was trying to get a hold of me. It was just piling up the problems on problems. So I called my parents again, begged to go to California. They said, fine, we're going to do this one more time for you. Went to California, really plugged into the 12-step scene there. Like, when I got sober, I was in my early 20s, and I thought my life was over, and I would weep and weep about how my life was over, right? But I was so lucky to be in Southern California in that time, because the whole world felt like it was exploding with sober people. You know, like, it just felt like we were living this technicolor reality of hookahs and drama and dating and, you know, like going to the beach and sleeping on the beach. And it just felt so magical. And I think the difference, right? Like the difference of full immersion was so complete for me than what I had experienced in the past from these treatment settings that I wanted to kind of bridge the gap and blend the two. So I got a really good psychiatrist. So I was on great meds, you know, that were tailored to me. I was in therapy once a week. I had a great community surrounding me, but I got to plan my days, right? Like I still was adjusting to life. So that's what happened. And, I just, my whole life turned on. I can't explain it any other way. It was this beautiful experience. And I was really young, and because Papa had died that way, I was conscious of being so young. I was like, this is the best. I'm going to have the best 20s. Like, this is going to be the best experience. And I did. So I went back to art school, and I got, an art degree in San Francisco. I dated a bazillion people. I had so many adventures, traveled all over the world. I was very aware that I almost didn't have any of this, and I could have gone a different way. Like, been 70 years old, committing suicide, double homicide. I was very, very acutely aware of that. And so segueing into Workit, and really it's a combination, right? Like it's a medication. For me, it was medication, therapy, and social. And those three things in tandem. That was my special recipe. And then I would say that I had a harm reduction path to get there. I think people in our worlds, Barb, sometimes bifurcate the worlds of abstinence-based recovery and harm reduction. But so often they're really merged.
Right.
So often we just practice harm reduction until we get to abstinence. Some people think harm reduction is great, and like that's just the end for them. And God, if that had worked for me, great, but
agreed.
Like gosh, and I see that work for our members, and I'm just more power to them. It's very difficult sometimes to be on the abstinence path. So, but that wasn't my story. So anyway, so then I was in San Francisco, and gosh, I created a design firm with my best friend in the world still, Kate Harris. And we were doing great and loving it. And we started working with a lot of digital health companies. And so in the day I would work with incredible Silicon Valley. And this is when like we were in the first Lyft, in the first month of Lyft, we used Lyft with a big mustache. And this was just in the world of everyone was creating a company, everyone was creating an app, like before it really soured in my view. But it was really, really exciting, especially for business and the arts kind of merging. So Kate and I created this business, Siren. We did great. I was so inspired by her, still am. But at night I was going to these AA meetings and just seeing kind of the effects of the opioid epidemic before it really hit the news. And so friends of mine were dying, they were going out, people were relapsing on all sorts of scary things. And I had always wanted to do a company in addiction, but it just sort of pushed me over the edge. What I saw that year, so in 2014. So we created Workit Health, and we created it from my living room. I took out the URL that night. I called Lisa and said, I have an idea. Let's do Workit because it works if you work it. And she was like, yeah, like Missy Elliott, like Workit. And Lisa I had known from AA for 10 years. So it was this dream for us to do something together. And so I took out the URL that night, and then we just hit the ground running. So, but our big thing, right, was to solve the problem of why treatment sucks. I mean, I don't know how else to say that. Solve the problem of, the 20 million Americans who are diagnosed with substance use disorder each year, currently in the United States, and the 9 out of 10 who don't get treatment, any help at all. And so I think we've made a dent. Our humble endeavor has grown up to a bigger business now, and we just closed a Series C funding, which just means we have more funding, another funding round. But I think we're doing well. I mean, the place from here to the vision, and I'm sure the I2I people feel like this all the time, where I want to go is like the gap is yawning, right? Like it's so vast, but I'm really proud of the culture we've been able to create and the conversations we've been able to enact and the change. So that's Workit.
Wonderful. Well, can you say a little bit about how Workit works? Like, I know that I know a little bit about it, but maybe my listeners have never heard of it. So tell people like what it is and how it works and why they might want to use it.
Sure. So Workit is fully online. So the first thing to know about it, it's a virtual rehab experience. But when you think about rehab and you think about going to a process group from 9 to 5 or therapy appointments or whatever, we make it really flexible. So usually people find us through either a friend or a family member that has gone through Workit before. That's about 33% of the people that come in through Workit, or a local search. So they'll be searching, how do I stop drugs from home? Or How do I stop alcohol from home? How do I detox safely? Those kinds of terms. We come up and they call us and we make them an appointment. So this is really important. We try to get people in same day, next day. Right now we're seeing such a surge of demand. So our wait lists are like 2 weeks, which is, which is crazy. So we're working really hard to open up capacity, but we're available in 10 states. We're available in Michigan, New Jersey, California, Washington, Alaska, Ohio, Florida, and Texas, and Oregon. So we're available in those states. So people call us, they get an appointment. They have a care team wrapped around them. So they have a nurse practitioner that and a psychiatric nurse that prescribes for anti-addiction medication, like agonist therapy, like Suboxone for opioid use disorder, that kind of thing. They have a counselor that they can have one-on-ones with, or they can just message with. So everything is sort of built around the person's particular preferences.
Got it.
And then they can go through courses. There's a really robust learning program baked within the app itself. So they go through courses that cover cognitive behavioral therapy techniques, dialectical therapies, those kinds of things. And they get better. So our outcomes are really amazing. And it's funny, it's not like rocket science, right? Like you put really good design to something and you put really good UX people to something and clinicians and magic happens. So I mean, if you let people drug test whenever they want versus lining up at 7 a.m. at a methadone clinic in a bad town, you'll get retention numbers that are better. So,
exactly.
We have really low retention on average. We only discharge 10% of people month over month over month.
Wow.
On average, people stay with us for a year, but a lot of times people just opt in to stay with our maintenance program forever, especially the harm reduction folks. And we are covered by insurance. So a big
that was going to be, I was like, I know that's going to be the question most people have. Is it covered by insurance?
Yeah. I have this wild belief that health insurance plans should pay for health insurance. Like
health promotion. Health care.
Kind of wild. So we've argued with every major plan in the country. I think we've made inroads 6 years later. But in the states that we're live in, we take the dominant commercial plans and we take the dominant Medicaid plans and the dominant Medicare plans. But the Medicaid plans are really important because Workit is a social impact company. A lot of our competitors, a lot of our peers won't take Medicaid because the reimbursement rates are so low. But we really do. We prioritize getting people care. So we take Medicaid plans as well.
Awesome. I love it.
Yeah. So everything we do, I mean, we're not perfect, we mess up all the time. I mean, but we really try our best. And I think we're a really noble company in that. Like we're really earnestly plugged in. But I think it starts with Lisa and I being people in recovery ourselves, having gone through it. So we try to make really equitable choices, but it's been a wild ride.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
So what about people in the states that you're not in? What does that mean for them, that they can't partake in your services? Or is there any part of your app that's accessible to people that can't get all of the services?
They can go through coaching, but honestly, the 99% of people come to us for the medication and the therapy both. So we're working very quickly to open up new markets and new states. And we'll be in 10 more by the end of next year, and hopefully all 50 by the end of 23.
Awesome.
So,
that's fantastic.
Hence that series 2. Yeah.
Fantastic.
We're working hard, but I mean, truly our mission is to democratize access to addiction care.
I love it.
Yeah. And we escalate people out. If somebody needs a tighter intervention, a more immersive intervention, we work with rehab centers to place them. Rehab centers are really tough because they don't, insurance won't cover the whole thing. So a lot of times, you can't really place anyone, but we escalate out or we de-escalate based on the person's condition.
Yeah,
Not
that's
we, our
wonderful.
clinicians.
Yeah, I know what you mean. That's fantastic. I really love it. And I love how, you're looking at people who are potentially multi-addicted. And I see, I know you probably hear about it all the time. Like I do, as we call it the whack-a-mole syndrome, where you get this one addiction under control and then that's like a whack-a-mole, another one pops up and then you get that under control, and I know one person who's in 5 programs. I know a few people who are in 4. Most people I know are in at least 2 programs because it's like this, I don't want to live in reality.
Yeah.
and I'm going to find a way to dissociate or
Yeah.
to numb or whatever.
Yeah.
When you were talking before about how like alcohol like really did it for you, that was me with weed.
Oh,
The
interesting.
first time I got high, I was 14 years old, and I was like, "This is amazing!" And I over the years, I mean, so I'm 58. That was 44 years ago.
Yeah.
I've met many, many people over the years who like hated weed, and I was like, "What the hell kind of
Yeah.
weed were you smoking?" And I just was like, "Oh my God, this is the best thing ever." And I it's just I can't do it. I can't indulge in it in a way like a normal non-addictive person could do it. And
Yeah.
I've had my bouts with drugs, with alcohol, with food. My main addiction is actually people.
Oh,
It's
interesting. That makes sense.
codependence. I mean, that's my worst, that's
Yeah.
the thing for me. But I would say I consider myself now to be a recovered codependent.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not anymore. In fact, I have such good boundaries now that I actually teach people how to have boundaries and coach on that. But,
It's great.
when you said that about the alcohol, I really identified. And, the trauma that you're talking about.
Ugh.
And I liked how you said it's almost like it flipped the switch to the allergy.
Yeah.
And that I haven't heard anybody say it quite like that before. And that really resonated with me and made a lot of sense to me. I am not an alcoholic, but I drank very heavily and abusively until I was in my early 30s. But
Yeah.
by then, I had already been, I'm not in my early 30s, in my early 40s. And I just sort of stopped drinking. I didn't quit, I just stopped.
Yeah.
And one day I was like, I don't think I've had a drink in like a year. But I was well into food by then,
Yeah.
and I was still smoking a shitload of weed
Right.
and all that stuff. So, I questioned whether I was an alcoholic. And my older brother's an alcoholic, and my younger brother, who is deceased, was bipolar. He was a
Wow.
dual diagnosis,
Yeah.
and his drug of choice was marijuana. And I remember thinking,
Oh,
like,
interesting.
how can you be addicted to marijuana? Well, now I know,
Yeah.
And so it's this skirting around all the different issues, and I really appreciate how Workit Health addresses all different kinds of things and doesn't put you into a box and say you have an eating
Right.
disorder, and that's all we're going to talk about is the eating disorder.
Right.
So
Right.
I
We try to do a
appreciate
lot
that.
of comorbidity stuff, and we're
Yeah.
extending that all the time. I mean, the other thing is the other behavioral health problems, right? Like you touched on bipolar, but statistically, 80% of people that are struggling with a substance use disorder also are comorbid with depression, or
Yes.
anxiety, or both.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
so we also prescribe SSRIs, right? Because
Oh,
we know
good. Yeah.
a lot of our
Yeah.
patients won't
Yeah.
have the time or the will or the means to go to a psychiatrist down the street for yet another appointment.
Right.
We talk
Right.
about
Who
the
does?
same thing.
Right, right, and they don't know that they're doing all these other different things. Yeah, I'm on a mood stabilizer, and
Yeah,
have been for
me too.
years. I'm an episodic depression person.
Yeah.
God willing, that will never happen again. I think recovery cleaned up a lot of my stuff. I'm
Right.
someone who I didn't know that I was a victim of trauma, and that a lot of my stuff was trauma response.
Right.
But I remember when my brother had his psychotic break he was 20, so that would have been 91. And I didn't know anything about mental illness. And I remember learning something like 80% of people with mental illness are dual diagnosis.
Right.
And so it makes total sense, because what they say is, that we're trying to self-medicate. Like,
Yeah.
reality isn't working for me,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
agree. It's exacerbated. It's tough. It's tough when you're in the throes of it, because it does look like a bipolar disorder, right? Like
Yeah.
when I got sober, people were like, you're not bipolar. You just have really high anxiety. So
Yeah.
they tried to treat me with the bipolar med back when I was a teenager, which only makes
Yeah.
the drinking worse. And
Right.
I mean, I didn't stop. I was supposed to.
Yeah.
Not under working conditions does it, but
Right.
me, and it's just a mess. It's really, really hard to figure out a diagnosis, and it's really hard to
Yeah.
say this is the one linchpin, right? Like what they did at Sierra Tucson, the recovery center I went to, and I think they've gotten better. Like I've been sober for 15 years, so it was a long time ago, but I almost shouldn't mention that by name. But I think they've gotten better. But what they did was really problematic, because they said, this is one slice. It's like only if I had cancer that had
Yeah.
metastasized all over my body, but they were treating an earache. And they said,
Right.
we're going to really work on your ear. We're going to clear it
Yeah.
of cancer. We're going to clear it of pain. and then we'll go to the rest of the body.
Right.
It's just a really silly notion from medical schooling, for the past hundreds of years or whatever. But and can't cut off the nose to save the face kind of stuff.
Right. Yeah. And I think that goes to, what you were saying before, is this isn't a healthcare system. It's like a disease treatment system that we have, and so if you are not treating the whole person for their health, but you're trying to stop a disease from progressing, you're going to look at like just that one little slice of something. The black and white thinking.
I was lucky. Southern California, I didn't realize that at the time, but they were just with the 12-step community there, the therapies there, they were doing really radical things compared to the rest of the country. Because I talked to my friends that were in Michigan and getting sober at the time, especially Lisa, and I was like, it wasn't like that for me. So people have this negative impression of 12-step, and I see why, because in some parts of the country it does sound kind of dramatically cultish, but it wasn't like that for me. Like my first sponsor said to me, you won't stop binging and purging until the 4th step, and that's fine, and I was like, what? And that's harm reduction. I mean, she's like, try to do it less and less, but don't. She's like, the goal is never white knuckle. And that felt to me like such a relief, because I had been trying to combat this thing with will, and what it really was combating the underlying failure to be in reality, the failure. And that's what she was saying, and it's in 12-step terms, but you could totally translate it to a psychology setting or psychiatry. But I wasn't treating the underlying condition. I was just white knuckling. The only solution I had, right? So, I think survival is insufficient, in the words of Emily Mendel.
Agreed. Absolutely, yes. And I personally am absolutely thriving in my life. And I credit 12-step recovery, but I also did years of therapy. But they didn't ever tell me I was traumatized. They didn't ever tell me you're probably an addict. They didn't ever tell me you grew up in a dysfunctional family. None of that stuff. But I also did a ton of like personal development stuff. So I was able to hit the ground running. But recovery for me is the thing that was able to help me unearth all of the patterns and the dysfunctional thinking and really turn the ship around. And, I am so blessed right now, and I'm literally thriving in every area of my life.
Like you're glowing. Like every time I talk to you.
It's real.
It's real. Like it's just what you have, Barb.
And I'm also crazy in love, and I can't wait when we get off this call, I get to go see my sweetheart, because I'm just like in love, like you read about. So
I feel that way about my daughter. She's 2, and I pick her up at 4:30, and I'm like, I'm so excited to see that little face. She's really funny. She's really pragmatic, and she says, "Mama, a big hug." Big hug. Like, she told me.
That's awesome. Good for her. She says what she needs.
Mama, a big hug, and then she gives me a pat on the back. And I say, thank you, St. Clair. I
love it.
But I think we're getting all the things, Barb, that we longed for through substance.
They
just come slower.
But they're deeper. And they last.
And they last.
Well, I think that's a really good note to end on. Is there anything else that you'd like to add before we go?
No, but this has been the highlight of my week, so thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you so much. Yes, thank you so much for agreeing to be on the podcast. So again, thank you everybody, and thank you Robin from Workit Health for joining us. And we'll talk to you next week.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right. Bye.
All righty.
That's it for today. Please share this episode with anyone who might find it helpful. If you like what you've heard here, you might be interested in private coaching with me. If that sounds like you, then head on over to barbchat.net, or you can get on my calendar for a free 20-minute consultation to help you make lasting changes in your life, like I've made deep, lasting changes in my life. My ideal client is someone who is ripe for change, but I'll coach anyone who wants to be happy, joyous, and free. So if that's you, then go to barbchat.net and get on my calendar. I'd love to chat with you. Please like and subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcast outlet. This helps other people find me. Thanks for listening.